had fallen in love with an Indian woman, and because my parents had fallen in love with each other. But really, it was simpler than that. I did it because it felt really right. Taking a step toward what you've always wanted, right? We don't have to explain ourselves because we just know, right? Our children will never doubt their place in this world, right? After we hung up, I lay in bed and whispered, "My husband, the neuropsychologist." It felt weird. I imagined our children. It felt less weird. I went to the bar downstairs, watched a bluegrass band, and hooked up with the lead singer in an alley afterward. My place? Sure. It felt medium weird. Over the next few days, the phone rang all the time. "It's a very good idea. Should have done it long ago. I told them you'd grow up and come to your senses." "Well, now you've gone and done it. Everyone here is too excited." I called my brother. "This is insane. All of India has called me in the last 72 hours. "You're the one who said you'd do it." "Oh, whatever, perfect son. I can't believe you agreed. It's like you've been taken over by aliens." "I haven't agreed to anything but a phone call." "How does this work again?" How it worked. 1. My dad called the next morning to give me the neuropsychologist's number. "No biggie, just a casual, 'Hello, I'm the daughter of Philip Jacob. Perhaps you would like to meet me sometime for a casual dinner in a public spot.' Dad. 2. I called. "Hi, this is Mira. My dad is a friend of your dad's. I hear you're up at Columbia. I'm down at Williamsburg. Anyway, let me know if you want to grab coffee or a drink sometime. Would love to meet up." 3. I lay on the couch, stared up at the ceiling, and waited for my real life to begin. 9 a.m. "So? What? You talked?" "I left a message." "Okay, good. So now we wait." "Thanks. Wasn't clear on that." 10 a.m. "So? Ma, you guys just called me." "I didn't call. Dad called." "And what did you tell him?" "Why don't you just ask him?" "Because I'm talking to you." 6 p.m. "So? I called him this morning. It's now the evening. He'll call tomorrow or in a few days." "He didn't call you back since morning?" "You guys, this is how American dating works. Calm down." At the bar, the vibe was off. "Let me get you a drink." "I'm all good, thanks." "You're from India, right?" "Just kind of want to sit here and think, thanks." "Think in your own apartment." I went back upstairs. No one had called. I went to bed. That night, I dreamed I was chasing a small brown boy across a lawn, but I wasn't sure if he was mine or someone else's. Day 2, 9:30 a.m. "Well?" "Dad, I promise I will tell you if he calls." "Okay, we're all just waiting." "Okay." "Listen, who knows about this guy, okay?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, could be some madness in the family or something. You never know." "She's right. Who knows what he was really like?" "Seriously? You guys don't want to give him a few days or something?" No one, it turned out, wanted to give the neuropsychologist a few days. "So you're not good enough for him? So what? Good riddance." "But why did you call him? That's much too forward." "Back to dating useless Americans, is it?" "Dear Mira, well, you can't always tell from afar how these boys were raised. You probably escaped a dismal life with that psychoneurologist. His loss. Sarah Kuchma." "Dear Sarah Kuchma, I'm fine. Don't worry. This is hardly the worst thing that's happened to me. I've been dating in New York for years, remember? Love, Mira." It wasn't until a full week later that I finally understood the neuropsychologist really wasn't going to call. And then I felt stupid. Stupid for calling, stupid for pretending I was the kind of person who could be happy in an arranged marriage, except I hadn't really been pretending, had I? So stupid for that, too. I mean, he's probably just some totally normal Indian guy with an American girlfriend he's been seeing for 7 years that his parents don't even know about. That's normal? What? That winter was like every winter in New York. Too cold, too long. I bought myself a membership to the gym so I could watch television while I ran. I went on a few strange dates. My mother took a trip to India and came back with the news. So I heard about what happened with the neuropsychologist. Fell into a black hole and couldn't call back to say, sorry, our parents put you up to this. I'm just not into it. No reflection on you. It's just that his aunt talked to your aunt and said, we've heard she's very plain. Is that true? And your aunt said, well, she's no beauty, but she's a really nice girl. And wait, what? Because you're not fair, right? So then they didn't want you, but that's all. That's all? Oh, Mir, you know how important color is to some people. I mean, you're never going to be somebody's trophy wife, right? If that's what they wanted, then it was a mismatch. That's all I'm saying. Right. I thought you'd feel better knowing. It's such a dumb thing. These people and their small ideas, poo to them. Anyway, you look like me. That's not so bad, is it? It's not true. Of course it is. People say it all the... You're not dark. That's not dark. Arun's not dark. Come on. You think you're so different from us. You're not so different from us. Why was this the thing that made me want to cry the most? I gotta go. That night, I wanted to call someone to meet me. Someone who would get it. Really get it. But there was no one to call. Anyone sitting here? Nope. Okay. Exit. All right. So, I think there will probably be some questions in the Q&A, which is great, but I just want to tell you guys a little bit about how that book came to be. Is that okay if I just give a little bit more background, Sherry? Yeah, okay. So the way that this book happened, as you can see, it's all conversations, which is unusual for somebody who I wrote novels first, and I'm used to writing essays. And what happened with this in particular is, I guess what I would normally do, my son got really obsessed with, I should back up and say my son got really obsessed with Michael Jackson. He was about 6. He started asking what color he was. I am brown, my husband is white, and he lands somewhere in between us. And when he was obsessed with Michael Jackson, he was listening to all the albums, he had the dance moves, he had the glove, the whole business. Okay, so he's 6. And I got him the albums because I thought, I'm a genius. If I give him the record albums, then he's never going to skip the songs and drive me crazy, right? So cool. And that was apparently not the thing to do with a kid who lands somewhere between brown and white on the spectrum. Give him a lot of very large pictures of Michael Jackson's face, because then he came back and said, what color is Michael Jackson? And I was like, yeah. So Michael Jackson is black, which means his skin is brown, and he sort of turned white. He said, he turned white? And I said, yeah. And he said, are you going to turn white? And I was like, no. And he said, am I? And I was like, no. And he said, what about daddy? And I said, daddy's already white. And he goes, was he always? And it was that one of those terrible parenting moments where you're like, great, I've just ruined everything. And so that was when, that was about 2014. And that was also when everything was happening in Ferguson, and the Black Lives Matters marches were starting, and they were going right through our neighborhood in Brooklyn. And he had a lot of questions, but he sometimes kind of got the facts wrong. So I remember at one point, he's like, there's a kid, his name is Ferguson. He was brown. The police killed him because he was brown. Is that right? And I was like, there is a kid, his name is Michael Brown. He was killed in Ferguson. And he said, by white police? And I said, yes. And he said, Ferguson's far away, right? So I knew that his brain was sort of taking this in. And then later, kind of that month, we were on the subway, and in this very sweet chirp, he just sort of said, are white people afraid of brown people? Which is just a, it's kind of bewildering question to answer. when your kid is 6. And I knew I didn't want to lie to him because my own parents came here in the 60s, and I think they were very determined for us to have a normal life. And I think a lot of that meant for them that we feel accepted. So the way that that translated in my childhood is when things would happen that felt really weird to me, things that I can now definitely say like, oh no, that was just racist. They would say, no, 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 no. We're in America. Everybody treats you the same. So I knew I didn't want to do that with him because I knew for me, it was really hard. It took me a long time to figure out what was going on. So I said, he says, are white people afraid of brown people? And I said, sometimes. And I should mention that this happened on the New York subway, and it was at the end of the day. So like everyone was doing that thing where they're just like in a funk and they're to themselves, but everyone heard him say this and everyone looked at us. And I clocked everyone that was looking at us. I clocked the Black woman standing next to me. I clocked the hipster white a couple across from me. I clocked the guy of like indeterminate race who I thought was maybe some sort of Middle Eastern, and all of them were looking at us. So I said, sometimes, kind of just trying to satisfy, I don't even know who at that point. And my son said, well, how do you know? And I said, what? And he said, how do you know which ones are afraid of you? And I said, oh, you don't always. I guess if there was like a wrong answer for the whole car, that might have been it. I just felt all the air go out of the car. And I saw the couple across from us just apologizing with their eyes. The woman next to us went, mm-hmm. So she understood. But I also felt the weight that you do in that moment of, what have I broken here? Did I break something? Did I hurt him? Did I hurt us? And so that's kind of how the book started. Because that conversation really stayed with me later on that night when he asked me if his father was afraid of us. That really stuck with me. And I just started shaking. And this was in 2014 when it was really hard to talk about any of this without having people accuse you of playing the race card, which I've always just been like, that's would be amazing if there were a race card to play. I would love to play that card. Would it get me something? But you couldn't really talk about it then. And you couldn't talk about it in a very specific way. If you talked about something like that, especially a kid, no one would believe that a kid was saying that. Right? People would say that's not a real thing a kid would say. Meanwhile, everybody that has a kid, everybody that's Black and brown in this country that has a kid knows for sure their kid has picked up on that stuff early on and quickly and just with absolute kind of clarity. There's that. And there's the part where I'm a writer. So I told myself that I could write essays about it, but every time I tried, all I could imagine were the people that wouldn't believe me. And it's really hard to like make a living writing sentences and then feel like those sentences are the very things that are going to be used to burn you down. And I'm actually kind of used to that coming from me. You know, I'm an Indian woman. I've been writing for a very long time. And I'm used to people taking me out online. I'm used to people sending me threats. I'm not saying it like I'm used to it, like this is no big deal. Every single time I feel awful. But I know that's just what it is. I'm not used to them coming for my kid. And the idea that they would come for him if I wrote the wrong piece made me really crazy. And then one day when I was sitting there, just feeling what was happening, right? All of us knew what was coming. We couldn't have told you exactly what form it would take, but we knew it was coming. Some of us had known for decades, and some of us had known since 9/11, and some of us just understood with the end of Obama's presidency what was going to be coming. And with all of that feeling, I ran to his room and I got the albums, and I drew us as paper dolls, and I cut us out and I put us on top of the albums. And then I just drew the conversation. And this incredible thing happened in that moment, which is that I didn't have to explain myself anymore. Like I wasn't, or what I mean by that is I didn't have to position what I was saying. I didn't have to say, this is my son and he's 6 years old and this is the place we were sitting, and sort of try to get people that didn't want to listen to me. I just wrote down the conversation. That's all I did. And there's something really freeing about that, about letting myself off the hook, of trying to get people to care, about not doing the emotional work. Like you guys probably noticed, all of those, all the people that I draw, their faces never change. They just have the same expression the entire time. And I did that for a reason. I did that. In fact, one of my early editors said, do you want to maybe occasionally give them like a cry face? And I was like, a cry face, or, an anger face. And I was like, no. And I couldn't have said to you right then why, right? I couldn't have said like, no, I don't want to do it because this and this and this. But as I went on, I sort of realized that what the reason that was the case is because as long as I wasn't making the characters emote, like think of how you read, right? Think of how you read. You read and you look at the picture to see how the character feels, right? You're like, oh, that terrible thing just happened. How does that character feel, right? But if you are looking at that and the character doesn't do anything, then, right? So you just have to carry that feeling. Exactly. You just have to hold that all by yourself. And that was this crazy alchemy for me. It just felt like, oh, I get to just do this. I just get to do this. I get to just say what our lives are and not worry about going through the pain of emoting it also that you believe me. Because I'm sure almost everybody has had the experience of trying to get someone to care about something and watching them not care. Right? We've all had that experience, right? And you're clawing out of that. And me, when that happens to me, I get frantic, right? So not having to do that, not having to get frantic, felt so good. It just felt like such a relief. So anyway, that's a little bit about how the book started. And I'm curious if you have questions, or Sherry, if there were things that came up for you, or.
Well, for me personally, when I got I would say call, but it was in actuality an email. If I wanted to take on this opportunity to sit down and go through this interview with you, I said, oh, I don't know. I wasn't sure. But then I went and I grabbed the book off the shelf. And I would say within the first 5-6 pages, I said, definitely, I want to do it. I have to know. I have to know, what was that gut feeling? What was that emotion that you felt in that exact moment when your son asked if his dad was afraid of him? Because I just personally, as a mother, I think I would have just had to sit down where I was and process in that moment.
Yeah.
But that was the first thing that came to me.
Yeah.
That gut emotion that you felt.
And I think what I did in that moment, because he was little, I think what I ended up doing is I sort of I said immediately, like, no. And then I was talking to my husband about it that night, and you see there's a panel in the book where I'm talking to my husband, and because I think as the brown parent, I'm the one that is often dealing with the race conversation in a way that my white husband, it just doesn't, because my son is brown, because he identifies with what I'm feeling about race, and he's like, you're the one that have the answers to this question. And frankly, he's mostly right about that, when it comes to like, what is it like to live in this body? And I think I had been sort of taking myself to the bathroom to kind of quietly shake on several different nights. So by the time he asked this question, it both just made my heart plummet, but I also realized immediately I needed to tell my husband. So I said it in this very matter-of-fact way, right? I was like, so today he asked me, we were talking about, are white people afraid of Black people? And so then he asked me, of course, as I was putting him to bed, are you afraid of us? So I told him, and my husband's like, wait, what? And I said, so I told him no. And he was like, wait. Our son asked you if I was afraid of him?
My goodness.
And I think I just hadn't realized how many feelings he was going to have about that, and how unprepared for them he was. Like, if I was unprepared for things, he was doubly unprepared.
Definitely.
And I think, it was one of those times where I was like, oh, we are a family, and we are people that live on 3 different planets with 3 different kinds of knowledge right now. And how am I gonna keep us on something like the same planet?
Gotcha. So that leads me to, I see here there's a question in the chat from an attendee
Yeah.
that is related to that in some form. The question is, first and foremost, hi, Mira. um, how have the challenging conversations you have with your son changed
Mhm.
as he has gotten older?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's such a good question. Thank you for asking it. So, he's 12. He's almost my height. He looks older in a way that like the men in my family do, which is that they have more facial hair than most people. And I think it places him in an older category even than he is sometimes with strangers on the street. Um, I think he feels things differently. Like when he was 6, it was like having a benevolent alien, right? It was like having this sweet little person that wanders through the world and it's like, what is racism? Why are people? There's a sweetness to it. He is not that person anymore. He has, by necessity and by history and by watching what has happened in the last 4 years, he has changed a lot. The last 4 years were extremely hard on brown and black boys. And everyone else, but really, I think really damaging. And so our conversations, the one thing that stayed the same and the one thing that I really try to stick to is I try to let him lead the conversation, ask me the questions, not forward the information unless there's something huge that's happening, like yesterday, with the shootings, right? With the shootings, and I knew he was going to probably see it on the news. So I said to him, let's talk about this when something happened in America and we should talk about it when you're done with school. And he said, is it the shootings? And I said, yeah. And we talked about that. So we talked about the fact that it was, 6 Asian women, and the fact that the shooter said it wasn't race motivated. So people were like, oh, so it's not race motivated. And we talked about how ridiculous that is, how ridiculous to let the shooter define the terms of that conversation. Um, and we talked also about what a sex worker was, because I wanted him to have a context for that. It's a lot at 12. He did ask about that, so I did say, this is what it is. But that's kind of how the conversation has changed. And I try to just let him lead it so that I'm not giving him more information than he can handle, which I think is a real temptation when you're, for me as a brown mother, there's a real temptation to tell him everything so that it will protect him somehow.
Right.
And I don't think it works that way, unfortunately, or we would all tell our children absolutely everything.
Definitely. So with everything in that respect, all of the situations, all of the circumstances, all of the tragedies, um, and you look at, I know in the book there was the discussion regarding on politics and individuals in office and uh, how that played into the relationship between you and your in-laws.
Oh yes. Yeah.
Especially with the 2016 election. Has your relationship with your in-laws changed since the book was written?
Okay, that's a great question too. So I'll just say, because I don't think it's a spoiler. Part of this book, part of what was happening, and part of the way it sort of evolved was my in-laws became avid Trump followers, and they are Jewish, and it really hurt our relationship in a way that was really hard. I've been married for almost 20 years. I really love my in-laws. And I really love my husband's family. At the same time, even being Jewish, they experience a level of whiteness and privilege that is completely not available to me. And it was really hard to see that they didn't understand Like I knew what was going to happen. And I think there was a real let's wait and see attitude. And I think for the people that said let's wait and see, either they very quickly were like, oh, okay, or they stayed in a place and continue to stay in a place that where nothing is bad enough,
Mhm.
because nothing that happens to us can actually be bad enough.
Mhm.
It's always something that that we could take differently, and so that was really hard. It was really hard on our relationship, and that's not resolved in the book. It's not resolved in life either. I wish I could tell you. I think there are probably so many people like me out there that have had real ruptures with their family members. And I feel sometimes when people ask this question, what they want to know is, does it end up okay? And there are two things I'll say about that, which is one, that I don't know that you can read the tea leaves of your family life through mine. Um, I wish that were also the case. But what, we had a lot of really hard conversations about it. My father-in-law sadly passed last year. Um, and one thing that we kept trying to do was talk with each other.
Mhm.
And that for me it became kind of a form of resistance. Just allowing the idea that we might one day reach each other, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Became a way to kind of show up for the work. Okay, and then the other, wait, was there another part of that I missed, that I
Mhm.
skipped?
Uh, no, the primary question was how the relationship changed.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of stayed, it stayed a little bit the same.
Well, I extend my condolences to your husband and you and your family and the loss of your father-in-law. There are so many questions, and it's just like I want to know the answer to every last one.
We have some time.
But in respect to colorism, as the book touches on in the East Indian community,
Mhm.
can you speak on colorism specifically, and why was it important for you to write about that?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So as you heard in the part that I read, I am darker than the rest of my family. And um, in a way, it was really funny when I wrote this, because most of the white friends that I have were like, I never noticed that. And every Indian was like, yeah. Because we know, right? Because we know how the system works and we know how we categorize this. So um, when I was young, I remember the aunties that sort of I didn't know I was darker than the rest of my family until I was about 5, when some of the aunties were talking, and they said, I overheard them saying that it was a pity that I wasn't fair. And I thought they meant that I was a cheater in
Hmm.
game. And I went to my mother and I was like, I'm fair. And she said, oh no. Um, so I didn't even know what it meant at first. But the way that that shows up in my family and in my experience when I'm in India is, people assume that I am less intelligent.
Mm.
They assume that I have less reason to feel good about myself.
Mm.
Men are always saying to me in India, "You're so confident," with this very baffled look, like, "Why would you be?" Which is a great feeling. Loves that, everybody. Um, so and the best way that I can describe it is a little bit the way that some Americans will sort of treat obese people, as though there's just something unsightly there, and which I find harrowing when it happens to an obese person. I find harrowing when it happens to me. The idea that somebody's just inherently wrong in their body
Mhm.
makes no sense. But the reason it was important for me to write about it is, and it's funny that you asked that, because when I was touring with the book, a lot of times people of color would come up to me and say, why did you write that part? Why did you write that part? Because now they're going to think, they being white readers, they're going to think it's okay to be racist, because they're going to say we all are.
Mm.
And and it was an interesting thing to deal with the anger that they had over me writing it. But also I had to kind of, the thing that I always say to myself is, but this is us. Like,
Mm.
this is actually who we are. We have this colorism. In India, it comes through Brahmanism, it comes through the colonialization of the British, it comes through all these different ways, but that's who we are. And am I not supposed to talk about who we are because we are so scared of the white gaze? Is that so we're not allowed to know ourselves because we're so scared of the white gaze? That's what we have to give up. We have to give up self-knowledge for that.
And it is something. It is colorism is a part of the Black culture, and it is a hotly debated topic in the Black culture. So that was one of those questions where I just wanted to get that insight. So thank you, because
Yeah.
the book, it's just at this point it is highly recommended for me to others.
Was it weird for you reading about the colorism?
No, not at all.
Mhm.
And like I said, based on the fact that it is, and it's an issue that is tackled within the Black community.
Yeah.
Colorism, fair, dark. So it's highly debated topic.
Yeah.
So,
And nobody has it easy, right? Like
correct.
I think, my friends who are fairer,
Mhm.
I think they get a certain amount of privilege, but if you get too fair, then it's also like, are you even Indian? Are you passing? And then there's the are you even part of our community? So, and I don't think that those things are, I don't think that pain is, frankly, the same pain as somebody who never gets any purchase in society, never gets any agency because people will not give it to them for their color. I don't think those things are on par, but I do think it hurts all of us, right?
Correct.
The idea that it somehow doesn't hurt us, I just don't think that's true. I think that's as silly as the idea that racism doesn't hurt white people, which I think is just a crazy idea, right?
Yeah. Everyone is affected.
Everyone's affected.
Yeah.
Everyone hurts from it.
Since we did have a question pop up in the Q&A, the question is, how did your family react to
Oh yeah.
those conversations?
Yeah. So, my family was actually, I mean, pretty great about it. If they had negative reactions, they're talking about it with each other, not with me. And that's okay. I don't feel like I need to hold people's unease about this. I was very deliberate in my writing of it, meaning, especially with my in-laws, I was really angry when I was writing it. So I had to ask myself after everything I wrote, are you writing this for clarity, to know more about your situation and to think more into it? Or are you writing it for vindication? Are you writing it because you just really want other people to be furious too? And I did write some chapters that were purely for vindication, and I cut them because I don't need the world to hate my in-laws. Like, that's not the part that's hard for me. The part for me that's hard is not that I'm angry with them, it's that I love them and I'm so hurt
Mhm.
by the limits of um of their understanding of me. And I wouldn't even say it's the limits of their love for me because I think they love me a lot. But I also think there is a place which they will not travel to understand what it is like for me, and that is painful.
Okay. Yeah, so there, like I said, there's just so many questions that I had thought to present to you. Um, when it comes to your son's complexion,
Mhm.
um, at this point, being now that he's pre-teen, is this a conversation that you and your husband have had as to that conversation that you've heard people of color say they have to have with their young male son?
Mm. Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, so we we have some of that and then not other parts, right? So every race has a different thing, right? Every race has a different thing to deal with. Ours is you know I was living in New York when 9/11 happened. It's in the book. I remember how Indians were treated in that moment, and I also remember and am quite aware of how quickly things turn, right? How quickly you go from being a citizen and a New Yorker to an enemy and possibly a terrorist. Our looks lean toward the you are a terrorist, not you are a criminal. So it's a very specific thing that comes for us. That said, I have talked to him more than a few times about what to do in that situation, and also the idea of like you are not safe in that situation. You stay quiet until your father and I get there, and that is the best thing that you can do, and that is the thing that I need you to know you should do. I don't think it's as I don't want to overstate it, because I don't want to pretend that for a minute it's the same conversation that Black parents are having with their teenage sons. It's not. It's different. And I think we all deal with our own private griefs around how to do that, but it is quite different than a conversation that white parents, I don't think that I mean, I've talked to my white friends about have they had this conversation with their sons, and they have never, and they don't feel that they would need to.
So of course, have to keep an eye on the clock.
Yeah, of course.
I believe that we end at 8.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure. I was just so excited. That's one of those details that is just right now not good. But if that is the case, and we are at 8.
I mean, if we go a little over, it's okay. I've got some dinner. Eventually I'll need to get to, but I'm okay.
Right, understandable. But I did have the question as far as the format. Why the decision to write it in graphic novel?
Yes. Yeah.
Illustrations, and I know you spoke to that just a little bit, but why graphic novel format?
Okay, so two things. I think I talked a little bit about the freedom it gave me, right, to just write the characters and to also just concentrate on the dialogue. But then, just as a person who creates things, and in case there are other people who write or make things in the audience, one of the things that I find really helps my creativity is constraint. Right. So the minute I put boundaries around what I'm allowed to do, it changes everything. It changes everything about how I can approach it. And it really makes my brain kind of light on fire with what are the possibilities here. So part of this is that I ran into this format that I was like, oh, I can do it like this. What if I only do it like this? What if I can never use a metaphor? What if I can never say how I'm feeling? What if all I will do to write this entire book is only write conversations, never tell people how I'm feeling, and that will be the whole thing, and people will go with that. And I turned in that book, and my editor was like, I need to know what you're feeling a few times. So there are some passages when I do sort of delve into what I'm actually feeling in the moment, but mostly it was this exercise in trying to get people, it was like trying to get people to see this life. And in a way, there's this interesting thing that's happening because the drawings are always looking out, right? So they're never looking at each other, except for one place in the book I break the format. But because they're doing that, it's a little bit like you are eavesdropping on somebody else's conversation. And I don't break that fourth wall. I never have the characters talking to the viewer, for example. But there's something that's really freeing about that for me. Like, how much can I get away with within that format? How far can I go? How many things can I do? Which is, and I always just say that because I think a lot of people that join these events are people that make things themselves or want to make things themselves. And one of the things I'm often telling my students, or even when I'm talking to, I have a writing group and fellow writers that all of us are kind of busily making work. One of the things I will often say is, what constraint can you put on this to let it flourish, right? How can you make this smaller so the job seems smaller so the rest of you bursts out to meet it? And that was really why I ended up doing it in the graphic.
Because I'm not big on graphic novel.
Yes, I've heard this from people.
reading. But as the young adult librarian, it is something that I'm familiar with.
Mhm.
So I wasn't fully aware that it was um, categorized, and we have it in our nonfiction section, adult. And so
Mhm.
when I grabbed it and I opened it and I thought, oh, this is a graphic novel. What? But
Mhm.
then I started reading it, and I like right off the bat, immediately that gut punch with that question from your son. I have to finish this. I have to read this book.
I'm
But
so glad to hear that. Yeah.
so, with that being the case, we did have a question come up asking what grade level would you recommend teachers introduce the book to students, and in what subject?
Oh, that's such a good question. Okay, so I know that Random House, my publisher, has a whole kind of academic branch that sort of focuses on this specifically. But so I don't have access to that. But what I can tell you is I've had a lot of teachers reach out to me about the book. I've done a lot of readings in high schools.
Mhm.
I think, I mean, my son has read it and he's in seventh grade, but he read it when he was, of course, like 2 years ago in fifth. Might have been a little early. But what are you going to do? How are you not going to read a book about yourself? But that said, I think that one of the things that's interesting about the book is that you can, it's very accessible to readers. When I talk to kids,
Mhm.
they really get it. Like they really get it. When I was on tour, that was actually the hardest part. Was I would inevitably have somebody in the audience who was 13 or 14, oftentimes a kid of color who had been adopted by white parents and hadn't had a place to have the conversation before and just needed to talk. So I would say that you can, as young as 13 or 14. I definitely think that there's plenty to relate to in here. I'll also say there's nudity in here. There's sex. There's, I mean, you got to know your 13 or 14-year-old. Probably they're like seeing that every night on television, but if they're not, if this is certainly no more lascivious than anything that they would see on TV, but it's I didn't shy away from those topics.
Yeah, and I appreciate that about the book. There, it's I would say that there are moments where it's heavy, but then I would also say that there are moments where it's very light. Um, Not in a dismissive way, but light in that you're comfortable with what you're reading, to the point where it is something that you could um, use to generate a conversation, a difficult conversation. And that was a question that came up from the Q&A. Any advice for people
I see
having,
that
people
question.
that are navigating difficult conversations with family and friends?
Yeah. Oh God. So my heart just, first of all, whoever sent in that question, my heart goes out to you because I know where that question comes from, and I live in that place too. So I'm not a trained anything, so I can't give you any real advice. I can just give you my human who thinks through things advice,
Yeah.
which is one of the things that first of all, when the conversation is too difficult for me, I never force myself to have it. I think for a very long time, um, especially frankly, because it's hard for me when specifically, like white friends or family come to me and they're upset about something and it has to do with race. It's hard for me not to feel like I have to be there to receive it and I have to be there to explain it to them. But I also allow myself this idea of if I'm not ready for the conversation, and that's usually the context in which I'm not ready for it, though it certainly could be with a person of color. If I'm not ready for the conversation, I don't have to have it right then. I can actually say to someone, I want to be able to talk with you about this. I'm not there yet, but I appreciate that you brought this up. Give me a moment and just leave that, right? I actually allow myself that. The other thing is that I think it's really hard. The thing that you're always threading in a conversation like that is that dance between hope, hope of a reconciliation and just fury at being unmet, right? And it's really those two, you're just teetering between those things. And what I try to do is allow myself just the possibility of something else. Like it probably isn't going to look like reconciliation,
Right.
but maybe it's not going to look like complete abandonment either.
Mhm.
Maybe there's a third thing that doesn't feel like everything is solved, but maybe there's a third thing that adds on to the pathway of where we might go together. And I just try to allow for that space
Mm-hmm.
and not to feel like a failure if that's where we end up in the third thing.
And so the time does say 8 o'clock, but I just have one other question.
Yeah, of course, of
My
course, of
hope,
course.
my hope is that before I can get it out and get an answer, we don't shut off. But 2021 is the 100-year anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. Any thoughts on those events, the impact on those now, those then?
Yeah,
Any
absolutely.
advice?
Absolutely. I think you all live with that history in real ways, in ways that reverberate through your community. And I think one of the things that's been so important for me to understand is generational trauma and how that lives in us, and how we don't know a lot of times how it lives in us because we don't know our history and we don't know what it is that has happened to set us up in this way. The most interesting thing to me about when I learned about the Tulsa Massacre, which by the way was in college, not in grade school, not anytime before, is it made something make sense to me about the United States, and it made something that had been unseen to me be seen. And that thing, which is I think to me about knowing ourselves and knowing what we come from, is so important if we're going to undo this. And because I do think we can undo this, meaning racism is a system. It is a system with real rules and real laws and real violence that happened in real ways. It's not a funny feeling that people have. It's a thing that happened with intention and for a reason. And the more that we can look at how those real things happened and what the real things that are happening now, how they have grown from that thing, because those things are not unrelated.
Mm-hmm.
The more we can look at that, that's the closest that we can get to being able to step out of that trauma, being able to walk toward a different place. So I'm really glad you guys had me for this. And I knew it was for the anniversary of this, and I'm really honored to be here. And I also just wish your city all the love and healing and bravery as is necessary for this moment.
Thank you so much. And as well, I am honored to have had this opportunity to have this conversation with Mira Jacob, and definitely will continue to recommend Good Talk and future endeavors that will come from the printing press from you.
Thank you.
As I said at the start of, this was a welcome, and this now is a signing off of the Tulsa City County Library Community Read event, an evening of just many scheduled as TCCI remembers commemorating Tulsa's race massacre with education, empathy, and healing. Ms. Jacob, wishing you much, much, much success and many, many, many blessings.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you all for joining us this evening.
Thank you all.